Good afternoon. Thanks very much for attending. I thought I'd start off for fun with a sort of a graphic version of employee engagement. The daughter of a friend of mine was showing me the graphic Jane Eyre, the graphic novel, over the weekend. And I thought, right, Jane Eyre, the graphic novel, I could do better than that. So I give you Employer Engagement, the graphic novel. Just so you kind of know what we're talking about here. So this is a business in the community, which is a employer engagement outfit. They've set up an event, which all took place in Canary Wharf, I think. So you have some teenagers being introduced to an eminent business person, Sir Stuart Rose. Next stage is that Sir Stuart sort of connects them across to another magnate. They're introduced to Anthony Jenkins. He happens to be chief executive of Barclays Bank, so they're switched across. He likes them, they like him. Next event, the girls get a work placement. They organise a fashion show. Stuart Rose gives them the clothes. Anthony Jenkins gives them some cash. They do the event. They feel good about it, and you see some of the outcomes coming out at the bottom. They had a wonderful experience. They feel very proud. So you get an idea here, what is this about? And obviously there's lots and lots of kind of events of that kind, but it just gives us a feeling what we're talking about here. So the challenge is then, how do we sort of get a grip on these sorts of events? They're very diverse, they're often very informal. How do we get a grip upon them theoretically and make sense of them in a coherent manner? How do we measure what benefits they bring? And how do we can kind of draw this together to sort of give a more coherent count? So just a sort of a bit of an effort to try and do that very briefly this afternoon. So what do we mean by employer engagement? Well, it's direct involvement of employers. I mean, clearly there's lots of other definitions, but the working definition for this afternoon is direct involvement of employers in the education of young people and all these different ways of doing it: work experience, enterprise education, and so on. So some of the questions we might be asking: how can this kind of employer engagement affect the outcomes, be they social, economic, or educational, of young people? And how can we situate these accounts of employer engagement in sort of broader sociological and economic theory? So we're not just telling stories, we're not just having graphic novels, but we've got a broader theoretical account of what's going on, or theoretically informed account, I should say. So some of the theories we're going to draw upon a little bit. And one of the ingredients to this is this notion of trying to get hold of education as a trajectory, as a sort of ongoing process where the earlier stages have an influence upon the later stages. Okay, so that's one dimension we're talking about here. Another notion is human capital theory, which treats education and training as raising the productivity of workers in the labour force. Thirdly, the sort of notion of social capital, a notion that people can become equipped to make better use of social relationships, to gain their ends, to gain other goods, to make informed decisions. And lastly, a notion of cultural capital, which is probably the most slippery of the concepts we're going to use here, but a notion about a broader notion of kind of understandings and behaviours and attitudes which enable people to make the right decisions, to gain access to resources, and to advance themselves socially and economically. Putting together some hypotheses then about how we can understand the impact of employer engagement. First of all, the notion that employer engagement can increase human capital, and therefore we can see this in measures of attainment and in labour market outcomes such as gaining employment. A second hypothesis, that employer engagement can be seen to increase social capital, and again we can see this in terms of gaining access to networks and gaining employment. Thirdly, that it can improve cultural capital in terms of changing attitudes and changing behaviours. And fourthly, that, and this is going back to the kind of trajectory notion, that we can understand how employer engagement adds to existing accumulations of human, social, and cultural capital, and therefore advantages people who've already got distributions of those. So trying to understand what it does in the basis of what people had before. So in this survey, Anthony and I we're just drawing upon 4 surveys, 4 reasonably recent sets of data, not vast surveys, but just an opportunity to draw across a range, and they're all kind of surveys of different kinds, but they're four different surveys, and I won't talk about them in any detail. But just starting off then, this is a YouGov survey, and what this looks at here is it looks at the number of employment engagement activities that young people participated in, and it tracks that. It tracks that across whether young people were NEET or whether they were non-NEET. Okay, so whether they were not in employment, education or training, or whether they were. Turning on to look at social capital, we're looking here at the way that employment engagement increases social capital. And what we find is that 74% of businesses were offering unpaid work experience placements to school pupils. And we find also that 50% of employers were offering paid employment opportunities. So what we're finding is a connection between employers offering unpaid opportunities and then subsequently offering paid opportunities, be they full-time work or part-time work. So there is a kind of connection, therefore, between the offering of work experience and then the offering of paid employment opportunities. In addition, we find that 41% are reporting that they're particularly offering placements to those who'd actually been on unpaid placements with them. So clearly, I mean, as I suppose would be evident to us, that employers are using work experience as a way of finding out about young people, as a way of building their understanding of their potential, and then subsequently making some kind of offer of paid employment to them. And again, where they're asked, what difference doing the work experience with them made to them, we're finding that quite a lot of them are reporting, over 55% are reckoning that this was pretty important to them. They're judging that the value of the work experience was quite useful to them in making the decision about whether to offer them employment or not. Okay, so here we're looking at the extent to which employer engagement increases social capital. And we're finding, this is a relatively small survey done on sort of 40 young people, we're finding that 45% of them did stay in touch with their employers after they did work experience with them for a matter of a number of months, and half of that number for over a year. So we're finding a kind of a lasting tail of influence of work experience in terms of a relationship with an employer. And again, we're finding that a smaller number, 22.5%, were actually offered paid employment on that placement. So a kind of lasting impact from work experience. This is a bit of a survey with young people, a relatively large survey of over 15,000 young people, which kind of is about young people's perceptions of what work experience did for them. And here we've got, 50% agreeing, strongly agreeing, 40% agreeing that work experience did change their attitudes, in the sense that it did make them think that, why doing well at school is important to them. So, a self-reported perception, a reported perception that work experience has changed their attitudes towards the importance of qualifications. And a sort of similar numbers saying, at least, that they're prepared to work harder in their schoolwork. So some evidence, therefore, of a perceived change in attitudes. This is reporting on the effect of careers advice, and I should say this is careers advice where employers had an involvement in giving this careers advice. This is not any old careers advice. This is employers' advice where there was an employer contribution to this, and here we find, that effectively careers advice, the amount of careers advice that they're given, does seem to impact, at least in their own view. It does help them to decide. It does help to form their opinion about what they wanted to do in later life. Now, this is trying to investigate the effect of employer engagement upon different groups, different segments of young people. So what we're exploring here is the impact of work experience in terms of helping to sort of make your mind up in careers terms on different populations. So the population is segmented by what kind of schooling they went to. and we find, reading across from left to right, left to right, that the work experience appears to be relatively valuable for young people at independent schools. We're moving across then, we see this apparently relatively powerful effect of work experience for independent school students as against those in comprehensive schools. Now, this needs to be explored about what this is, and Anthony and Prue gave a talk earlier on. But one can surmise that this may be to do with the quality or the appropriateness or the matching of the work experience that people in independent schools are receiving. Now, this is taking it a little bit further and exploring the extent to which work experience actually proves useful in getting a job. Not just evaluation of work experience, but how young people perceive the value. And I should say that this survey was longitudinal, and it was asking people to look back upon how work experience had helped them. So they were looking back upon the work experience that they had in the past. Okay, so 19 to 24 when they were answering the survey. So again, we can see that those who are at independent schools are tending to rate the value of that work experience as being, relatively more valuable to them in terms of obtaining employment. So they say. So on the face of it, the effectiveness of work experience for more advantaged students who perhaps in some way are getting a better service in terms of work experience appears to be greater. This is a similar table tracking the value of work experience in terms of helping young people get into university. And it shows a similar sort of pattern. And this is an attempt in a single diagram to try and sort of pull together some of the messages which are coming out of the evidence and some of the ideas about the different ways that we can conceptualize what's going on. So what we're suggesting is that we need to see the sort of education of young people going on here in the middle. At the top, we've got environmental factors which are influencing the progress of young people, their family, their peer groups, and so on. At the bottom, we've got potential employer engagement inputs which are going on, whether they have work experience, whether they have enterprise education, whether they have careers advice for employers, whether they have mentoring, the kind of inputs that they might be getting. We can view the progress of young people as being accumulations of different kinds of capital. I mean, okay, it's an analytical tool to do this. You might choose to do it in other ways. You might prefer to have different sort of concepts, but this is one way one can do it. So we can see these young people as accumulating over time social, cultural, and human capital. Now, what's interesting to see is that as they go through the trajectory, there are opportunities for contributing, for further contributions from employers and from other factors outside. And those contributions will work upon the existing accumulations that young people have. So people who are relatively advanced in terms of what human capital they've got and what social capital they've got, they may be able to benefit to a greater extent from the interventions which take place. So what you get from it depends a little bit as where you are to start with. Okay. So just drawing out a few implications for research. I've probably got a couple of minutes left to do this, yeah? So there does seem to be robust research that does explore the difference that employer engagement makes to a range of outcomes. There needs to be, I guess, more longitudinal work to explore how interventions combine with environmental factors over the life course. We need to explore further the different impact different kinds of engagement make to different groups. We need to sort of think a little bit about why employers make these contributions. What are the motivations, be they business, be they individual or social, for employers making these contributions? And we need to think a little bit further about how we can conceptualize these different kinds of benefit. And finally, just to sort of sum up very briefly, there is some rigorous evidence that there is impact. These concepts of social, cultural, and economic capital can be used to conceptualize the evidence arising from employer engagement. There's scope to use these capital concepts to try and unify and bring together what goes on here. A life course approach is useful, but I suppose finally there are sort of policy issues being raised here. I mean, they're not new, but there are policy issues being raised here about, to what extent, for example, we want these employer engagement interventions to be universal, or to what extent we want them to be targeted. These are questions which I think have been raised in other papers over today. Okay, thank you.